Hello and welcome to World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. Coming up on today's program. Laying the foundations, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang meets with global high-tech giants in the Guizhou province to inject momentum into China's big data investment. And we sit down with Zhao Bowen, founder of Quanti Health, the high school dropout turned pioneer and innovator, is breaking ground in healthcare through cutting-edge microbiomes research. We begin today's show with China's Big Data Industry Summit and the E-commerce Innovation and Development Summit in the southwestern Chinese city of Guiyang. These days, data is becoming an important approach for us to connect all corners of the world. And this has changed our world from business and research to our daily life. So how will China's big data industry develop and what concerns lie ahead? Before we move on to our discussion, first, let's take a look at this.
The world at our fingertips. Vast amounts of information are available to us regardless of time and location, thanks to big data. The China Big Data Expo is being held in China's Guizhou province, a less developed southwestern region aiming to become the center of China's big data industry. Some 20,000 experts in the field worldwide gathered to share their insight. At the opening ceremony, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said,
China is now integrating information technologies with production to increase the quality and quantity of goods and cultivate new momentum for a new economy. If we can incorporate new technologies such as big data, the products we make will better meet the demands of consumers.
In recent years, usage of big data in China has skyrocketed. Using up-to-the-minute traffic data, Baidu traffic maps suggest the fastest route to avoid jam roads. Didi, the ride-hailing app, connects all registered drivers with potential passengers. The shopping platform Taobao provides personalized product suggestions based on the records of individual customer interests. And that's just the beginning. Many other domains are starting their own businesses. Huochebang, a data-driven mobile app, helps truck drivers to find delivery work.
We make the information transparent, symmetric, and quick. Drivers don't have to look around to find the right job. The logistic firms can find the personnel that are suitable.
And some are looking for the core of data business.
What we're trying to achieve is to know the trend before it happens or gets really popular. We could provide our suppliers with a lot of analytical results regarding customer preferences on products. Through deep cooperation, we could really help the supply side.
Convenience is not the only benefit of big data. There is no doubt much more to come.
And now to understand more about big data, we're joined in the studio, in our Beijing studio, by Mr. Andy Mok. He's Managing Director of Red Pagoda Resources. Welcome. And in Southampton, UK, we have Mike Baston. He's visiting professor at Beijing's University of International Business and Economics. And in New York, we have Ari Zodan, CEO of Quantum Media Group, a technology and business expert. Welcome, gentlemen, to all of you on World Insight. So it seems that a lot of big names are there in Guizhou to attend the summit, and the event is seen as a way for China, for the Chinese government to bring its technology investment to its less developed interior regions. So tell us why Guizhou has been a choice to host this event, and what kind of potential does it have?
Sure. Well, I think from a national economic development perspective, I mean, it helps equalize the disparity amongst the different provinces in China. So I think that's one important reason that this is an important opportunity for Guizhou. And then why data centers? So I think it's very important. One of the important cost drivers for data centers is electricity, the availability and cost of electricity, and Guizhou is very strong in that regard. And also, one of the biggest costs of operating a data center is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So with Guizhou's more temperate climate, that also, I think, gives it an important advantage.
So your consideration is primarily geological. What about you, the other two gentlemen? We'd like to have your insight on this, Mr. Baston. It seems that we have communications problem with Mr. Baston, and let's turn this question to Mr. Zhao in New York. What are the competitive edges, do you think, that Guizhou can offer?
Well, I mean, I think it's great on several levels. First of all, getting these conferences and these conventions, and more importantly, these conversations in cities that need the help, that need some kind of economic boom, I think is really critical. And it's very, very important, not only socially, but geographically also. These conferences, they're attended by 20, 30, 40,000 people. It's good for small business owners. It's good for individuals, and it's good for large corporations. So overall, I think getting these conferences, getting these conversations, specifically as it relates to big data analytics, which is an industry, quite frankly, where we're just scratching the surface, it's great. And I think it's a great move for the conference to be there.
And we know that big data has only blossomed in the last 5 years or so, but there are already many fascinating ways to make use of these data. So which countries are leading the way in this, and where does China stand now in the development of this revolution?
Well, I think American companies like IBM, are very well known for some of their breakthroughs, like Watson and things like that. But I think China's made enormous progress in the last few years, and especially when you look at the number of graduates, the number of companies like Didi, like Alibaba and Tencent, that have enormous data sets, as well as increasingly experienced technical staff to take advantage of that data. So I think the outlook for China to catch up and close that gap is actually very, very promising.
All right, and Mr. Zhao.
I happen to agree.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, he's making a great point. I would push back a little bit to say that obviously China has the numbers. They have the human capital, but what I think the country needs is that they need better cooperation between other countries on the execution side, on understanding the data better. Listen, data's been around since the Stone Age. There's very little value in the actual raw data without the interpretation of the data, and then thereby also being able to monetize the data or understanding the data. Countries like Israel is coming out with extraordinary technology for us to be able to understand, translate, and break down a lot of that raw data. So encouraging trade between China and other countries, China and the US, China and Israel, I think is going to be critical in terms of filling the gap.
All right, now we have some figures to help us better understand the situation in terms of big data in the world. A recent survey of over 1,000 companies around the world showed that although the awareness of big data's importance is significant and widespread, only 1 in 4 companies are able to leverage big data to boost productivity and create value. North American companies who have a longer history of working with big data and whose universities have led the way stand above the average mark. So, gentlemen, given the fact that benefits of using big data are so well known, why is it that only 1 in 4 companies utilizes this technology?
Well, I think you have to go through a 3-step process to use big data effectively. So first, you have to gather the data in a format that allows it to be analyzed. Second, you have to have the proper analytical tools to find the insights and the actionable recommendations. But finally, and I think this is where a lot of companies struggle, you have to have the organizational structure to actually implement those predictions or the results of that analysis. And particularly in medium to larger companies, that can be very, very difficult because they have established systems and procedures in place. And it takes time to make those changes, but it also takes a lot of executive will to, in a way, force those changes through the organization.
Right. It seems that big data is transforming the way we live and the way we do business. So, Mr. Zhao, what do you see as the strengths or weaknesses of Chinese companies when it comes to the utilization of big data?
Well, obviously the big concern, the moment anyone hears the word big data, right away privacy usually comes to mind. So the fact that we're addressing the issue, the fact that we're having that conversation I think is very, very important. And again, whenever you have a complicated ecosystem, and certainly big data is a very complicated ecosystem, there's always going to be pockets of efficiency. And that right now, I think that pocket of inefficiency is really the big privacy issue. But as standards get created, I think people are going to be becoming a lot more comfortable with it to be able to turn over the data, and I think that gap is gonna close as well. And I want to mention also, understanding big data is very important for small businesses because it enables us to be able to move from a reactive stage to a proactive stage, which is very, very important in terms of getting ahead of the curve, understanding your business model, and actually making money. So you have the raw data. If you're able to translate the data, break it down, understand it, and get ahead of the curve, gives you a huge competitive edge against some of your competitors.
And I think another important point to add to that is that big data is also an important equalizer, because you look at Amazon Web Services, some other of these software as a service type tools, it gives sort of the big data, the big company big data analytical capability to small companies as well, or increasingly more available to small companies, and gives them that same kind of potential competitive edge.
And now let's turn to Professor Baston. He's joining us from Southampton, UK. We've been discussing the situation. Where does China stand now in this big data revolution? What do you see as the strength in China's big data industry?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
What do you identify as the advantages of Chinese companies when it comes to the utilization, the acquisition of big data?
The advantages?
Yes.
Well, I think the advantages are fairly huge. I think that the Chinese technology sector is set for major international expansion and emergence following it, the likes of Huawei and Lenovo, and big data and data analytics is really going to be an area where they can really show what they're capable of. I think we're seeing a new generation now of Chinese technology company, both small and large, and this is really going to be an accelerated path towards international expansion and really quite some dominance. So I think it's a very exciting time for the Chinese technology sector, and what's happening in Guiyang at the moment is a very positive step along that road. So huge benefits, and I think China's ready to capitalize on that.
And now it seems that everything has something to do with big data, but the problem is many companies, they are eager to acquire data, they're eager to predict consumer behaviors from these data, but they do not have specific plans or knowledge of how to use this data. And that's why the government has promised its help. It's rolled out an Internet Plus strategy to integrate mobile internet, cloud computing, and the big data to its manufacturing industry. So how exactly will this plan help transform the business sector?
Well, I think clearly in a place like China, but in China, especially where the government is so important in terms of setting policy, that the fact that the government has made this a priority, I think will be very important in accelerating the adoption of big data, whether it's in manufacturing or even in mining, a very traditional industry that is not immediately obvious what digitization might bring, but actually can add enormous value as well.
So big data, Mr. Baston, big data has the potential to predict consumer behaviors, but do you think one day it'll have the potential to alter consumer behaviors?
I certainly think so. I think it's still in its infancy. I think we have to accept that big data and data analytics is something that's still fairly new. So what the future holds, nobody could be terribly sure, but certainly that this will be a major aspect of the world economy, and I think Chinese companies are very well equipped to utilize this. So it'll be an interesting few years ahead, and as I just said, 2 or 3 Chinese companies are really very well placed now to capitalize and dominate further.
And Mr. Zhao, I'd like to ask you this. Some critics have been saying that big data in China is overhyped, and they argue that the industry is full of bubbles and there's hot money going around. Do you agree with this?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the challenge is where the hype is really just in the term. in the word big data. The term big data is thrown around so loosely. Nobody really knows what it means, other than it's a fun word to use. But in terms of the industry being hyped or in a bubble, absolutely not. We haven't even scratched the surface. In fact, I think we're at the point where it's just, at this point, it's a conversation. Standards are being created. We're starting to understand that there's a market here. But in terms of it being inflated or hyped, absolutely not. What I would say, though, it's important, I think, for the Chinese government as well and the industry at whole to be able to encourage small businesses to be able to get a hold of this data and to play in this space. There are a lot of small companies right now in the United States that are flourishing, companies like Pipestream and UpChannel, that are focused on conversational commerce, where these large companies are able to interact via IM or chats or bots directly to the end user. So there's a lot of value there. It's a great conversation to have, and again, we're just at the starting point. We haven't really started to be able to monetize in a way where the potential is for big data.
Mr. Zhao thinks that we are at the starting point. What about you, Andy? Do you agree that big data in China is being inflated?
I don't think it's being inflated at all. So I do agree that I think we're really at the beginning stages, because as the Internet Plus strategy also is implemented, there's more and more data available. I think of big data as clearly, all of the data that can be gathered from sensors through video, through weather sensors, traffic sensors, and more data is becoming available to be analyzed. And we're making a lot of advances in the analytics side as well, particularly with AI. You mentioned about some of the conversational commerce operator. There's other companies like that also using hybrid approaches to use big data here in the sense of unstructured information, so text to make better decisions and better predictions. So I agree. I don't think it's a bubble at all, and we're just at the beginning.
Mr. Baston, your view on this?
I think we are at a turning point. I think it's what you said. I disagree. I think we will see perhaps revolutionary, certainly exponential change when it comes to the acquisition, the understanding and the use of big data and technology, typically with younger generations in the driving seat. So I think we could see real change very, very soon.
And another problem, gentlemen, with big data is that big data are too fast, too big, and too diverse to be understood by traditional analytical methods. So it seems that a whole new set of technologies and human capital are also being built around it. Do you think that the big data industry has potential to become the key driver of the economy in the future? Andy?
I do, and big data, depending on how we define it, and again, I agree, sometimes it's loosely used, but one subtle risk I think that we face is that as we get so much diverse data and our algorithms get so much better at making predictions, that humans lose the capability, they fall behind, and that we can't understand why these things are happening. Like, why are we getting these predictions? They're right, and they work, but we don't understand, and that potentially is dangerous.
So what is the long-term impact on the economy, on people's daily lives, Mr. Zhao, that big data can provide or in some way could change our lives?
And I think overall, and I guess I'm using that term relatively loosely, but overall it's going to enhance our life, enhance our economy and our overall well-being, and it's about, I think there's an element of ease there. There's a lot of plug-and-play opportunities also. And what I wanted to mention also is that the cross-border opportunities, whether it's Israel and China, the United States and China, to be able to share a lot of this data also, even as it relates to world crisis or to healthcare or innovation, I really think is going to make the world a better place. And there are companies like Powerlinks based in New York as well that encouraging trade between U.S. and China and U.S. overseas to be able to outsource products more effectively. So overall, I would say, and again, I use it loosely, taking out the privacy concerns, which rightfully so is an issue. Overall, it's going to be able to enhance our lives on a day-to-day basis.
So it seems that the privacy issue is very important in the big data industry. I mean, the wealth of information is often vulnerable to hacking, and then people's digital presence can be used to invade their privacy. So, Mr. Baston, how concerned are you in this?
Well, I have to say that there are concerns. I think they're quite widespread and genuine concerns about piracy and privacy, but I think those will recede. I think it's such a new thing now. Technology is advancing so quickly that a lot of people find it difficult to accept this change and feel nervous just because it's something that's largely unknown or so very, very new. I think once we proceed a few years down the line, we'll see that concerns about privacy and piracy will decline. It's probably an area where government needs to do more. Governments need to work harder with the private sector, so better relations between private sector technology firms and national governments, and it needs to appear on the agenda at major summits, G8, G7 and G20. But I think it's not a major concern in the long term. It's only a short-term thing.
So big data could become bigger in the future. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your discussion on this. We'd like to thank our panel, Mr. Andy Mok, Mr. Mike Baston, and Mr. Arizo Dan. Appreciate your insights. Well, stay with us here on World Insight. We've got our final segment coming right up. We sit down with Zhao Bowen, high school dropout turned pioneer innovator who founded Quanti Health. He shares some insights from his adventures in the cutting-edge microbiome field. Welcome back to World Insight. And now let's turn to our special three-part series on the world of innovation. Today we will present you the story of Zhao Bowen, who dropped out of high school and is now running his own biotech company. And he's only 24 years old. My colleague Tian Wei sat down with him to hear his insights on innovation.
Welcome to the World of Innovation, a special series presented to you by World Insight, featuring exclusive interviews with innovators, entrepreneurs, thinkers, and educators about the realities and future of innovation in our world today. The innovative spirit usually becomes evident early in life. That's true for many of the world's most innovative icons, such as Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg. Many young people around the world are following in the footsteps of these icons, such as the one that we are going to meet today, Zhao Bowen from China, a young entrepreneur who dropped out of high school to start his own research lab and company. That is after working for years as intern and researcher with a major research institute and gene development company. Before we hear his story, let's take a look at this.
Defying the odds. At only 24 years old, this young man is running his own biotech company, Quanti Health, which focuses on molecular health testing. Zhao Bowen is not known for sticking to the beaten path, unlike most of his peers. At the age of 17, while most of his high school classmates were preparing for the college entrance exam, Zhao decided to drop out of school. Even 2 years before that, Zhao had already taken up an internship in the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences to join a team working on the DNA sequence of a cucumber. After bidding farewell to high school, Zhao joined a research team at the Beijing Genomics Institute, known as BGI, now the world's largest genomics organization based in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen. There, he led a mind-bogglingly complex enterprise, searching for patterns among thousands of gene variations that might shed light on the biological basis of human intelligence. It was the largest project of its kind in the world. And in 2014, Zhao left BGI and started his own company. Making a difference is not easy, especially at such a young age. And this begs a big question. What on earth had altered Zhao's life path?
I happened to meet with one of the I believe the greatest educator in the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science. He was my first tutor. His name was Huang Sanwen. And he actually believed that the state-owned institutes should spend some time and efforts on educating the young. So he started the project on how to say, let the children grow besides the scientists. So that was his plan, and I was the first.
Oh.
I believe I'm not the last. At that time, I had a choice. I had a chance to be in Shenzhen in the BGI, the Beijing Genomics Institute, for an intern. So, that was just like a regular summer intern along with other high school students. But, when I stayed there for only a month, and I found that, I had a passion in what I was doing there. And I believe that maybe for me, the best choice was to stay there. BGI was like a college to me. So in Shenzhen there, I was working with a very small team called the Scientific Special Force.
Okay.
It's like, when there is a very hard problem, you give it to the SSR and they tackle the problem. So whatever the cost is. So we worked like day and night overtime, and it feels so good.
How is that going to be critical for you to make your own choice eventually in research?
It's kind of interesting. Unlike most people would have thought about, the research in genomics are actually not in the lab, get your hands dirty. It's not like that. It's all about data. It's all about information. Mm-hmm. In BGI in Huada, there were a certain, a process line that turns the biomaterials into the data. So the DNA and other matters were extracted and be sequenced. That's a process called sequenced. So you basically read out the sequence of all the 4 bases, ATCG, and that became a file on the computer. And after that was our job, our work. We deal with all the data, all the numbers, and we try to calculate all the possibilities and the likelihoods and the correlation between different data. The correlation between what we call the genotype, what happens in the gene, and the phenotype, what happens in the macro world.
How much advantage do you think you had over some of the others in the team in terms of using computers and be able to do data analysis without, a higher education in the field? Would you be able to do it?
It's hard to say that if I have advantage. I think the answer is yes and no, because I have to say the lack of education in the university it sometimes make me feel that I lack of some, systematic knowledge about the whole thing, about the history of this biology and genetics and a lot of other things. But since we're actually doing genomics, it's a very, very new field, and actually the whole technology is sped up after 2007 actually. So when I was there, 2009, it was like the beginning of a boom. And for me, at that time, lack of the knowledge of the history became an advantage because I have no burden at all. I just start from ground zero, and I just need to learn more and do more and work hard.
So you feel you're burden-free, while some of the others in the field for a long time could, in a way, overshadowed by what they knew before?
Exactly. There was a famous line in the Star Wars. It says, sometimes you have to unlearn something to learn something. I believe that word are telling the people with a lot of experience in one field when he's facing a new thing.
And now you're moving to another field. Do you have to unlearn what you learned before in order to really learn new things? Tell me about it.
I have to say, when I changed from studying a human being, what we call the big genomes, because the genome of mammal and the plants are very big. It contains several gigas of data. But when we changed to study the very small microbes, the germs and the virus.
That's what you're doing right now.
Exactly. And we're studying the community of a lot of germs. You can say it's, it's a lot. It's really a lot. About 100 trillions, you know. That's a very big number. And the way of studying those genes, how to say, from the micro level, they are the same. We use the same tools, same technique, but from the macro level, if you want to see the whole picture, it's totally different. It's totally different. I have to unlearn a lot to adapt to the new way of thinking. It was kind of interesting because it's a new field, and the field of metagenomics, it actually started like 5 years ago. So it's a very young subject, and it means that it lacks enough, we lack enough tools and enough method on researching. So a lot of methods that we use are actually, or even the new methods that we invented, were based on the experience and knowledge about the fields that we used to work with before. That was the, you know, the big genomes and the human genome, the animal genome. It was different. I have to say it was different. Because now we're actually not anymore studying one organisms, we're studying thousands of organisms altogether.
Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg were not just high school dropouts who started up companies. They also had to conquer all kinds of difficulties before achieving success. Following in their footsteps, Zhao Bowen is also facing challenges of his own. His company is now researching on human microbiomes and is working to popularize the gut microbiome test, a new way of assessing health. Zhao says he works about 14 hours each day, supervising a team of researchers and talking to potential investors. But his study, only a few decades old worldwide, is brand new in China. Attracting and convincing investors remain a major challenge for the young innovator.
Was it easy for them to be convinced?
Of course not.
What did you do then?
You know, they asked a million questions, but I believe the whole point, all the questions were around one thing, that is, what are you doing?
And these could be the science guy, and they still have a difficulty to understand what you're doing.
Yeah, because it was just too new to application science.
So now, if I ask you, what do you do? How you can briefly tell us, what do you do?
Well, you know, nowadays, to a general market guy, I would tell them that I study shit. Hope that's not offense.
What do you mean?
You know, because we studied the microbes, the germs in your gut. So there's a way that we have to sample that. And we sample from the feces. The fecal sample of anybody, we take that. It sounds not very good, but it's science, you know. And we take that and do the very full high-end analysis.
Does it work?
It works. It works like magic.
To explain things in very simple terms, right?
Yeah, it is just like, you know, now you take the blood and you can see a lot of factors. And one day it will be like you take some feces, and we can also see like more than that, millions of factors, and they're all related to different systematic diseases, including the type 2 diabetes, the cardiovascular diseases, and even, you know, depression.
So now, where are you going from here?
3 steps. And step 1 is what we're doing right now, and we believe that we have achieved that already. So it's about standardizing and make all of those science theory into one single application. That is the gut microbiome test. So now we're trying to popularize a new form of test that only take a few fecal. So actually it's even safer than taking the blood because the blood test is invasive and taking the fecal sample is not invasive. And from that sample, we can see a lot, as I said, millions of factors. But it was all about how to distinguish which factor are good enough for the medical test.
What
so
about
that's
the second
step one.
stage?
The second stage is about, based on those knowledge, we can do some certain intervention on the body, on the microbes, the little germs inside your body, and try to make them serve you, make them work for you, and so that your health can be improved. For example, imagine you can lose your weight without changing of diet, but only the changing of the little germs.
All right. And the third stage?
The third stage is that based on the knowledge that we accumulated from the correlation of those genotype in the germs and the phenotype of the body, we can develop, hopefully we can develop some certain medicine, some new medicine. And those medicines were not based on the chemical compounds, but based on the microorganisms.
Wow, it's amazing. How far away from there, the final stage?
I would say that the final stage will be within 10 years, of course.
You know, your story, many would say, would remind them of the story of Bill Gates, who also dropped out from high school and went on to build his own business. But I just wonder, from your perspective, what do you think about his story compared to yours? And what kind of future are you looking at? I mean, Bill Gates, there's only one in the world. What do you make of the probably enormous amount of challenges that's in front of you?
You know, talking about Bill Gates, my first English name was actually Bill when I was really, really young, like 3 years old.
Is he your idol?
Yeah, that time I just heard about that name a lot, and the English teacher asked me to choose an English name. Actually, I don't understand why, we all have an English name, and I said Bill. But later I started to use the name Bowen. That was just my Chinese pinyin, and in the same time, I believe that is a good name. So I believe that that also reflects my change of the thinking of the whole thing. There's only one Bill Gates, and I would never become another Bill Gates, or Bill Gates in China, or Bill Gates in the world. It doesn't make any sense to me. To me, I just want to be the first Bowen Zhao. And that was good enough to me. So I do things that I really want to do. And I would be really excited and would be pleased if I succeed.
If those who are willing to jump into entrepreneurship from China, listening to your story, what advice would you like to give them?
Be careful, but since you are young, do what you want. That's important.
Do you give yourself a time limit as to how long you want to try?
No. I have to say that nowadays it was already very hard for me to imagine what my life would be without my company, without my career and this way of lifestyle. I knew that I missed a lot of things, but I also gained a lot of things. So it's a trade-off. It's like business. There's always trade-off. You have to give away something in order to gain something. And it's fair enough to me, and I am satisfied with this outcome.
Bowen, such a pleasure to have you on our program. From the bottom of my heart, all the best to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Wang Mangmang, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world.